welcome back to Holistic Healing by Tiamat. Today we are going to start in the sleep series. So for the first episode of today's sleep series, I wanted to read a bedtime story for you guys. This is how to build a healthy brain. Now I thought that this would be a good idea to start the series with something that's going to get you relaxed, chilled out, but that is something that's relatively easy to follow along with, and that is relatively short so that you can just put it on while you have a sleep or a nap or just relaxation, and you just listen to the words of this book. So yeah, if you are going to sleep, you might want to grab yourself a little sleep time tea, and you might want to get yourself propped up in bed. So we will start to read this book. Thank you very much. How to Build a Healthy Brain by Kimberly Wilson. Reduce stress, anxiety, and depression, and future-proof your brain. We will be going straight into chapter 1 today, rather than reading the introduction. Chapter 1. The Global Burden of Mental Illness. There is a great deal of discussion in the media about the rise in non-communicable or lifestyle diseases and the urgent need for effective policies and treatments to end this trend. But which disease is the leading cause of disability across the world? Diabetes? Heart disease? These are both a good guess, but the answer is actually depression. This means that more people suffer impairments in daily functioning, such as attending school and work and enjoying social relationships, because of depression than illnesses like cancer or stroke. And in only 10 years, depression will be the leading cause of global disease burden, a measure of how much an illness affects quality of life, expectancy, and the economy. Depression is great bedtime literature, isn't it? Depression is a term for a group of overlapping symptoms that, together, significantly impair a person's mood and ability to function. Depression is often thought to be solely an illness of the brain, but it actually leaves its mark throughout the body and is characterized by a range of psychological and physical interpersonal symptoms. Psychological. Persistent low mood or sadness. Feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. Low motivation, loss of interest in things that were formerly pleasurable, low self-esteem, tearfulness, feelings of guilt, irritability, impaired decision-making, anxiety, thoughts of self-harm, or suicide. If you are feeling troubled by suicidal thoughts, make sure that you do reach out and speak to the appropriate person so that you don't struggle with your ideologies. So yeah, there are also physical traits of depression, which include sleep disturbance, appetite or weight changes, gut symptoms, lack of energy, slow movements and or speech, aches and pains, and a loss of libido, and changes to the menstrual cycle. And also self-neglect comes under this as well. Poor functioning and performance at school or work come under the category interpersonal, as do social withdrawal and relationship difficulties. We have effective drug treatments for depression since the late 1950s, so why is depression a growing global problem? Frustratingly, our current modes of treatment, typically antidepressant medication and or talking therapy, are not as effective or accessible as we need them to be. As the number of people being diagnosed with depression has grown, so have the prescriptions for antidepressants, yet more than half of the people taking antidepressants in the UK have ongoing symptoms. This discrepancy between the first-line treatments and residual symptoms has led to a rethink about what causes depression and, therefore, how it should be treated. It's not that medication is not a valuable tool, but perhaps we have been so focused on it that we have forgotten to check what else might be in the toolbox. On top of this, across the country, mental health departments are short-staffed. Services are being closed and health helplines are being shut down, meaning that talking therapy and effective treatment for depression is now inaccessible for a growing number of patients. This is unfortunate, and there is now robust evidence from human trials that certain lifestyle factors, our daily habits and our activities can help to prevent depression from developing or to reduce its severity. Many of these factors are cheap or free, and it can be implemented immediately. I have written this book to give you access to this research and practical tools to turn the evidence into easy, everyday habits. Young people. In Western countries, depression is directly linked to the second largest cause of death in young people. After accidents, the major cause of loss of life in those aged 15 to 29 is suicide, which is typically driven by depression. Sadly, rates of depression and suicide in young people have increased faster over the last 15 years at any point since records began. That's not good. There are some important questions being asked about what has caused this sudden rise in levels of distress that young people are experiencing, and the answer appears to be a combination of environmental and social and lifestyle factors that undermine physical and brain health and psychological resilience. We will take a closer look at several of these factors throughout this book. What about later in life? Over the last few years, dementia, including Alzheimer's disease, became the leading case of death in the UK, and in 2017 the WHO, World Health Organization, estimated that there were 47 million people living with dementia across the world. By 2030, that figure will jump to 75 million. A new case is diagnosed every 3 seconds. And dementia is the name for a group of devastating age-related neurodegenerative disorders. In these illnesses, over a period of many years, brain cells will begin to break down and die, creating lesions, gaps in the brain tissue. The sufferer progressively loses cognitive function, particularly in domains such as memory and in decision-making. There is certainly no cure for dementia, and in fact, some of the world's largest drug companies recently abandoned development of dementia drugs due to lack of efficiency in clinical trials. Again, this is leading many of the field of neuroscience to reevaluate previous assumptions about the cases and causes of dementia, opening up new avenues for research and intervention. That said, in the world of medicine, it is already common knowledge that dementia is not an inevitable part of aging. A recent review by The Lancet in one of the world's most respected scientific research journals estimated that if we carefully followed the best lifestyle advice, we could prevent up to a third of global cases of Alzheimer's. That will translate to up to 15 million fewer people being struck down by this terrible disease. If 1 in 3 cases of Alzheimer's disease could be prevented or delayed, which with improvements to lifestyle and daily habits, then why isn't this crucial information easily available to the public? Why don't more people know about it? And a recent study showed that within this survey, Nearly half, 42% of UK adults say that dementia is the disease that they fear the most, only 34% thought that you could actually reduce your risk. And only 1% could actually name the 7 known risk factors, which are smoking, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, depression, and lack of mental stimulation and physical inactivity. The lack of committed and comprehensive investment in a public health campaign for the brain leaves our communication even more vulnerable to these life-shattering illnesses. The growing mental health crisis. There is a long history of the brain and mental health being shortchanged in comparison to physical health. Despite being some of the most significant causes of disease burden in the world, mental health research is still woefully underfunded. I know from personal experience as the former manager of National Health Service, NHS, mental health facility, that National Health Service facility, that when budgets are cut and mental health provisions are the first in line for the chop. When we look at the prevalence of mental illness, the growing rates of diagnosis, the restrictions on its access to treatment, and the protracted recovery, this mental health last approach makes very little sense. And a report by one of the UK's largest mental health charities found that 40% of visits to general practitioner, to a GP, involve mental health concerns. A separate NHS report showed that mental illness, including anxiety and stress, is the number one reason why people take sickness leave from work when they do, and they are off for longer periods than physical conditions. There's some mud on the back of my book because I read it in a field. Want to know what that is? And yes, I will wipe it by the next session. And if you're already asleep, then you probably don't even realise that I just said that. But if you're dozing, then hee. The wide-scale favouring of physical health over mental health also ignores the fact that mental health conditions often have significant physical symptoms, as listed on page 8. This means that, which we mentioned earlier, this means that when someone goes to their GP for stomach problems, back pain, or fatigue, both doctor and patient may be erroneously enraged in looking for a physical cause for an illness when it is in fact a psychological one. Failing to hold the brain in mind causes delays in identifying the true causes and the right treatment for many patients. One of the reasons for the disparity between how mental health conditions are treated in comparison to physical illness is the erroneous belief that mental health conditions are not real, that they are solely a problem of psychology and not biology. It's so important to remember that the brain is an organ. It's just an incredibly complicated one with some very special functions. For example, we all know that for our heart to work properly, we have to look after it by eating well, exercising and avoiding smoking, and so on. A heart that is not properly cared for will begin to show impairments in its function through changes in blood pressure, palpitations, and pain. These are clues that our heart needs some extra attention. The same principle applies to the brain. A brain that is struggling will begin to show impairments in its functions. It just happens that the brain's functions are mood, personality, planning, decision making, information processing, and memory. These are the clues that the brain needs some extra attention, but too many people will brush off these symptoms of an incidental or worse, something to be ashamed of and ignored. The idea that mental health is something less real than physical illness does not make us stronger, and in fact is quite the opposite. We know that recovery from mental health conditions is best if you intervene as early as possible, during the first episode or when symptoms are mild. However, the misunderstanding stigma around mental illness means that people sit on their symptoms of brain distress for weeks. This misunderstanding and stigma can cause this distress for months and even years afterwards. By the time the symptoms are bad enough for them to seek professional help, the illness is much more entrenched and more difficult to treat. It is unfortunately no exaggeration to say that we are facing a global and mental health crisis. I cannot state this more clearly. Across the lifespan, from the young to the elderly, the leading causes of death and disability are illness of the brain and mental health. As well as the rise in depression in the UK, there was a 14% increase in Alzheimer's disease between 2016 and 2017. It is unfortunately no exaggeration to say that we are facing a global mental and brain health crisis, and I cannot state that this is the most clear. Across the lifespan, from the young to the elderly, the leading causes of death and disability are illnesses of the brain and mental health, as well as the rise in depression. And in the UK, there was a 14% increase in Alzheimer's deaths between 2016 and 2017, and scientists have dismissed the suggestion that this is simply because we are living longer. Not only are more people affected, but these conditions are affecting people earlier in their lives than ever before. Alongside this, the number of people living with severe mental illness is growing. More people are being detained under the Mental Health Act, and around 1 in 10 children now has a diagnosable mental health condition. Something is profoundly wrong. There is something or many things about the way that we are living, the way that we are neglecting our brain health, that is putting us all at greater risk. For me, this is simply not enough to say that someone is depressed or that they have insufficient serotonin available in the brain. These statements are descriptive, but they don't tell us anything about why this is happening and, importantly, what we might be able to do about it. How we get to the root cause of this dysregulation. How to build a healthy brain brings together the latest research on the known modifiable risk factors for mental illness and neurodegeneration. It helps you to understand the science and empowers you with effective, practical tools to start improving and protecting your brain health today for years to come. Chapter number 2. A quick note on research. It is important to open a newspaper or read an article nowadays without coming across a piece of apparently groundbreaking health research that claims to extend or enhance your life. If a lot of the time that information seems contradictory, that's because it is. But that usually isn't the fault of the researchers, it's down to the new way that we consume our news. In the olden days, before the year 2000, newspapers and a handful of TV news programs had the monopoly on how we acquired our information. All news had to be accessed from an infinite number of daily editions or broadcasts. If a news story broke after 10 o'clock news or the evening edition, it might appear in the radio, but otherwise we all had to wait until the next publication cycle to find out what had happened. Wow, could you imagine that, having to wait until the next publication cycle to work out what had been going on in your community? I can't imagine that, because even when I was younger, we didn't necessarily have immediate access to social media to be able to look at what had happened. But we had the computers within our homes, so we could go home. We didn't have like our phones, our devices within our pockets or whatever, but we could go home and use our parents' computer or like the family computer that was in our dining room, and we could log on and we could look up the local newspaper and find out what was actually going on within our community. So just imagine not being able to even work out what was going on. That must have been scary in a way, and it must have been like worrying, because you don't know if you're going to go outside, if you're going to be safe. I really do get that. Wow. So yeah, if a news story broke after the 10 o'clock news or the evening edition, it might appear on the radio, but otherwise we all had to wait until the next publication cycle to find out what had happened. And on top of that, these outlets had a small number of gatekeepers, editors or science journalists, who had the final say on what got written about and published. As the world moved into the digital era, that old model started to fade away. News and websites could be updated in seconds, and a deluge of dedicated news channels suddenly had hours of airtime to fill. This technological shift caused a change in the function of news. Where in the past the news was a service, today it is better described as a market. Yeah, that's very true. A lot of news publications, services will use their news to advertise their content, which isn't really the best. I don't personally advocate for this, but yeah, that is definitely what is going on out there. However, most of the major news websites are funded by advertising and a revenue model that depends on capturing as many eyes as possible. In this highly competitive news market, clicks mean everything, so editors have to find a way to make their content as compelling as possible. Psychologically, the best way to capture someone's attention is to appeal to their emotions. And because we evolved to rapidly respond to threat, editors spin headlines to create as dramatic sounding a story as possible. I have spoken to many researchers and journalists who felt unhappy about the headline that was applied to their study or their story. It is also very common for research that has only been conducted on mice or even on cells in a cell culture dish to be published as though the results apply to humans. Often, you have to read through several paragraphs, most people don't, to discover that the story pertains to a mouse mother fed large amounts of caffeine and not human mothers drinking coffee, for example. For their part, the editors are simply doing their jobs and getting as many people as they can to click on their story, securing revenue for the company. However, the result for the consumer is an unhelpfully confusing array of dramatic news stories with advice that seemingly changes by the hour. This doesn't seem to just leave the reader unsure of what to believe, but it makes us doubt the validity of scientific research altogether. This is, of course, hugely unfair on the researchers who work hard to conduct a high-quality research, but also does a disservice to the public who rely on these outlets to translate and disseminate the gems of really useful information hidden within hard-to-access scientific journals or overshadowed by a sensationalist headline. The role of social media. There has been another addition to the information landscape that makes navigating the health and wellness space even more perilous. Social media. Social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram have fundamentally changed the way that we consume information. For the most part, this is hugely a benefit to humanity, and the speed with which stories, videos, and petitions can now be shared has provided new outlets for social justice, activism, disaster intervention, and financial aid. It has also changed the way in which we access health information, with people turning to bloggers and lifestyle influencers for their health information. A recent PwC Health Institute report found that 90% of young people believe that the health information they find on social media is the truth. However, unlike registered health professionals, many of these people are unqualified and have not been taught to read and interpret scientific data and are not bound by professional codes of ethics and practice. This means that even with the best of intentions, they may be disseminating unreliable or false information to their hundreds, thousands, and perhaps millions of followers. But also, I'm not discrediting those people myself, because although that is what this author is currently doing, I'm not discrediting that, because I currently do believe that actually we are able to learn from observing our own scientific data and from observing our own historical patterns, our own genealogical patterns, better than the doctors can, because the doctor's not going to sit there and look specifically into your specific genes, into your dominant genealogical strands. So it is important for you to look for, say for example, if cancer strains are prevalent within your family, and if you also have like diabetes prevalent within your family, all sorts of things, cancer, diabetes, things like that, these are the type of things that you may be able to prevent with lifestyle changes. And many people who you are finding on social media have slowed down their symptoms by trial and error, and by living their life, by going towards different medications, but different health foods and different medications that they're trying from the doctors and things like that. Many of these people are documenting their experiences, and it's helping other people, so I am not discrediting that, but yes. Following bad health advice can have serious consequences. Wellness blogger Belle Gibson was able to amass thousands of followers and hundreds of thousands of dollars, falsely claiming that she had cured terminal brain cancer with a plant-based diet. Who knows how many vulnerable people followed her example before the truth came out? Thousands of social media accounts promote a range of health treatments for which there is absolutely no scientific evidence, such as the alkaline diet for cancer or celery juice for I can't say this word, PANACEA. In 2018, an American court awarded $105 million in damages to a woman who was encouraged to eschew conventional cancer treatment in favour of an alkaline-based treatment. Her illness is now terminal. Fortunately, increasing numbers of researchers and healthcare professionals are now taking to posting their research directly on their own social media pages, which is probably one of the best things to do, allowing them to explain exactly what they have found, what it means, and to whom it should relate. I have actually personally seen this myself, even surgeons, and I think this is brilliant when people are talking about things that are like not good and things that like you should follow. So yeah. This was the reason that I decided to move my own social media presence away from the occasional picture of my lunch to a mental health resource where I explain and share research on mental health and psychology and nutritional psychiatry, because I love that actually. But yeah, anyway, increasingly publications and influencers are seeking out the advice and opinions of qualified experts, which will help to reduce the confusion and keep consumers safe. That said, it is also important that consumers are able to think critically about the information that they are presented with and what someone means by their evidence. That's brilliant. Being able to explain what it means to the right people that it relates to is super important, I think. And I think that if doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals are making their own social media pages as well as focusing on their own work, of course, it's actually really going to help people out, because what it will mean is, say for example somebody wants to go to a surgeon and they don't know what, like, I don't know, I'm just talking about a surgeon for example because you might want to, like, I'm talking about cosmetic surgery, but yeah, so for example you want a nose job and you don't know what it's going to entail. If you hear someone talking about the common do's and don'ts and the people that you should be going to, it's going to help you to make informed decisions. Also, say for example if you're having chest palpitations or something like that, if you're going to a cardiologist, you're like online, you might not have to get up and go to the doctor, because you may find out exactly what your symptoms are, and you may find out it's just like a little bit of gas, because that's what my granddad had once. He had indigestion and he thought that he was having a heart attack. He went rushing all the way off to the hospital and then found out that it was just indigestion, but he did actually have heart problems later on in life, so it could have actually been a heart attack that they didn't catch in time, but anyway, because he died from heart related problems. But anyway, as I was saying, that's not important. It's super important for us to make sure that we are accessing the right kind of treatment, because if we were to access the right kind of treatment perhaps from the safety of our own home, we may not need to go to the doctor if we were ill, and then we may be able to cure it from our home. However, I am just going to go. Increasingly, publications and influencers are seeking out the advice and opinions of qualified experts, which will help to reduce confusion and keep consumers safe. That said, it is also important that consumers are able to think critically about the information that they are presented with and what someone means by evidence. Not all research is created equal. The scientific method attempts to refine our notions of truth by testing assumptions under rigorous conditions, and there is an established process to move from an idea, hypothesis, to accepted knowledge and treatment. Let's imagine I am an 18th century doctor called Edward Jenner, and I have a hypothesis that people who have previously been exposed to cowpox found in cattle develop immunity to smallpox. Smallpox was at the time a highly contagious and deadly viral disease. Happily, it has since been eradicated through successful vaccination programs, and it would be extremely valuable to understand whether being infected with the milder cowpox strain virus could actually protect people against the more dangerous smallpox. As the person proposing the hypothesis, in strict scientific practice, it is my responsibility to disprove it. The scientific method tasks me with doing everything that I can to prove myself wrong, and if I cannot, then I can say that my hypothesis is supported. Notice that I didn't say proven. This is because there is always the chance that there is a piece of contradictory or interfering information out there that I or others haven't yet come across. In this way, the scientific method always leaves room for new and better evidence. If you have read any scientific articles yourself or have listened to interviewers with researchers, you will have heard the universe speakers use a lot of language that makes it seem as though they are unsure of what they are saying. The results always suggest or indicate that an idea may be supported. It may sound as though these scientists are hedging their bets, but this language is actually a reflection of scientific rigour and intellectual honesty. They will be confident of what they have found, but that the principles of scientific method mean they are leaving space for the outcomes to be refined by future research. Not all evidence carries equal weight when it comes to quality, authority, and generalizability. But in evidence-based medicine, EBM, the hierarchy of evidence, usually depicted as pyramid ranks by the quality and strength of scientific evidence. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, isn't it? No, it's not. What am I talking about? What am I on about? But yeah. Oh no, it's hierarchy of evidence. What am I on about? Anyway, I'm just chatting a bunch, getting excited and stuff. Anyway, so A shows you that. I'll show you, and then I'll explain them. That's A. That's B. And then the bottom one is C with the magnifying glasses. I'm sure you can actually see that. I'll read them out to you. On the bottom of A, you've got case series / reports. Then you've got case control studies. Then you've got cohort studies. Then you've got randomized control studies. And then you've got, at the top, is systematic review / meta-analysis. And that is the validity. So that is how they take the truth, essentially. So case series and reports are actually at the bottom. And systematic reviews and meta-analysis are actually at the top, which is very interesting. So yes. Now, at the top of B is systematic reviews / meta-analysis again. Then you've got randomized control trials. Then you've got cohort studies. Then you've got case control studies and case series reports. But this is more wobbly, as this doesn't have a strong foundation. I'm guessing that we're going to talk about these, because I'm guessing that they're all actually the same one. And then C, it's just zoomed in closer. And then the magnifying glass says systematic review / meta-analysis, and it has been taken off of the top of the pyramid to look at the rest of the picture, which makes sense because the top what it is essentially doing, the reason why you are reviewing these things, is to look at what is going on in the bottom of the pyramid. That is why it is so important to review what you are doing. I find this myself. I constantly go back on my own social media platforms and things like that to review what I am doing, to review what I have been doing, to review the mistakes I've made, to apologise for mistakes I've made, and to constantly just keep improving myself, because it is so important to just constantly make sure that we are able to review ourselves and our team, our network. So yeah. Murad. The source is Murad, M.H. Assi and Al-Suawis, and okay, they were it's called the New Evidence Pyramid, and it's by BMJ Evidence-Based Medicine, so you can find that yourself if you want to. Anyway, the case reports. At the base of the pyramid are case reports, observations from individual practitioners on individual patients/cases. So that is what forms the basis of these structures, because you've got to remember that the bottom of the pyramid is the most important. Many people may think what's going on at the top is the most important. No, they may be the most valid, but it's not the most important. The most important are the bottom of the pyramid. Because, but these are the most important studies to look towards, because they form our foundations, they form our structures. So the bottom of the pyramid always forms the structure for the top of the pyramid. They are often interesting to read because an experienced clinician is in a good position to notice unexpected or novel outcomes of a treatment or intervention, cases that buck the trend or contradict the current paradigm. However, they are often interesting to read because an experienced clinician is in a good position to notice unexpected or novel outcomes of a treatment or intervention, cases that buck the trend or contradict the current paradigm. However, because case reports relate to individual observations that have simply emerged in a one-off situation, they cannot account for any unique factors of the practitioner, patient, or environment that may have an influence of what is being observed. For example, what if whatever is being observed was just an accident? Case reports can help us to develop hypotheses that can be rigorously tested higher up to the pyramid. And in vitro studies, mechanism studies. In vitro studies, cell or tissue samples are exposed to the substance being tested. So I might take some human immune cells and expose them to cowpox virus. I could then test how these immune cells respond when they are later exposed to cowpox. If they were able to fend off the smallpox virus, I would have my first piece of evidence that, at least on a cellular level, there was a relationship between cowpox exposure and smallpox immunity. But events that occur on a cellular level do not always translate on a systematic level. Systems are much more complex than individual cell activity, and there could be hundreds of other factors in a system that could interfere with the action that we have observed in the cell culture dish. Animal models. Animal models give researchers a clear sense of nature of the interaction between an active compound and a live biological system. Commonly, experiments will be conducted with mice or rats that have been specially bred to exhibit a murine, mouse or rat version of a human illness such as Alzheimer's disease or multiple sclerosis. Animal research illuminates that the biological mechanisms that might be involved in disease action when it is not possible to conduct the research within human participants. So yeah, animal research helps us to work out what biological mechanisms may not be involved and may be involved in disease action when it is not possible to conduct the research with human participants. And it is worth saying that scientists have to apply for stringent ethical permission before they start conducting experiments with animals. In their ethics applications, researchers have to clearly explain how they will care for their animals and demonstrate that they have considered all ways in which they will limit the animal's distress during the trial. At the top of the pyramid are randomized control trials, systematic reviews, and meta-analyses.